There were very high stakes in the top of the table clash between Forge and Atletico Ottawa. They were separated by 1 point going into this game at the top of the table. Now they're separated by 4 because Forge win it frankly quite comfortably, or at least convincingly, 2-0 over Atletico Ottawa at home. They are now 19 games unbeaten in the CPL, 23 in all competitions. AGR, at this point, I don't know how I can see anybody really stopping them. Can you?
Feels like the only fixture I'm looking at right now where I see, okay, this is going to be interest. Because for me, Ottawa was one of them. Like they
Yeah.
obviously top of the table. It's Cavalry away because I still have to play Cavalry away twice, which is not easy.
Right.
At the same time, just given that they dismantled Ottawa thoroughly, like really, that's the only way I could put it. They dismantled them.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, 2-0 flatters Ottawa. Granted, Forge did have to survive some nervy moments because in the first half, they were all over Ottawa. Ottawa didn't even have a shot in the first half. It could have been 3-0. They miss a breakaway, they miss a couple chances. But then once they got the second, it was just such an incredible, such a thorough offensive performance, defensive performance. And Ottawa really only made it interesting because they had a bunch of late chances, but score facts, 2-0 lead, all that, they kind of had to go for it. So, man, a performance like this definitely does make you really start to believe in the invincible claim. I know people have been throwing it around and you kind of laugh at it. It's like, yeah, you're right. Like if there's a team that could do it, it's Forge. But every week they're putting out evidence that they can make it done. And all of a sudden in a week where you beat Ottawa as thoroughly as you did. You beat York United too in a derby game, and then for good measure, you draw the Whitecaps in a game you're probably pretty pissed about. It just
Yeah.
adds credence that man, like who's going to stop this team? Because even one of the top teams in Canada had their struggles.
Exactly. Quite frankly, at this point, with 9 CPL games left, I mean, maybe the Canadian Championship second leg, notwithstanding, that one's going to be tough for them against a certainly healthier Whitecaps team at BC Place. But if we're looking at the CPL and whether or not Forge can actually go invincible, I think the only team that's going to stop them is Forge, right? This is a team that has proven over the years that when they're at their best, they're pretty much untouchable. And occasionally during seasons, you get them on those moments where they don't quite have it, or they're, not to say that they take games off, but there are games where they're maybe not at their best. This year, they haven't had a lot of those, and even if they have been not at their best, they found a way to get a point or something out of it. And I think, frankly, this unbeaten streak is fueling them to stay switched on in these dog days, these August, July, now soon to be September games in the middle of the season where it can be hard to put your best foot forward every single game. They're also obviously boosted by that depth. They've got so many players on the bench that they can bring in. They've got Alaman Cisse coming back to health now. Even Noah Jensen is a guy who will start for pretty much any team in the league. He comes off the bench most weeks for Forge. It's just remarkable to me how thoroughly, as you said, AGR, they took down Atletico Ottawa, especially in the first half on Sunday. They seem to have seen a kind of upstart Ottawa team who want to be the next big thing in a Canadian Premier League, the next great team, the next champion. And Forge are just taking this moment to remind them that maybe they're not quite at that level just yet, right? The comprehensiveness with which Forge went to them in the first half, 64% possession, outshot them 7-0. Again, probably should have been up 2-3, maybe more nil at halftime. We asked Bobby about this game after the match as well, and he was pretty effusive in the way that he discussed how well his team played and what they knew they needed to do against Atletico Ottawa.
We work on it a lot in training, is understanding moments, understanding when to be quick, understanding when to be controlled, you know, reading the triggers of the opponent. We know Ottawa as a team that moments likes to press quick with 5 players, and then you immediately just have to find the space either in between the lines or so on. I thought the guys did that very well, especially with some of the longer play into Jose in the first half, and splitting their lines. Yeah, they know detail. I like detail, and they enjoy it, and that's a great thing to have with players when they like the finer points of the game. And I think that's what these guys are doing very good. And it's like I've told them, it's not a privilege. I mean, it's a privilege to be where you are. It's not your right. So you just got to get back to it and work, because there's another one coming.
And you can tell how much Bobby enjoys working with this group, right? AGR, maybe again, not to award Forge the Shield in August, but just from what you've seen of them, what is maybe the most impressive thing for you?
It's funny, just because when you mentioned how Forged usually in most years they kind of lose their way a bit in the middle of the year. You kind of almost get bored. Something just that stood out that really is kind of absurd. Since the start of June, they've played 11 CPL games, 33 points on the table. They've won 9 and drawn 2. They've claimed 29 of their last 33 points in CPL action. Cavalry and Halifax and York are all below 29 points. Like, they've claimed more points since June than pretty much the rest of the league, bar Ottawa.
Than 3/4 of the Canadian Premier League.
It's just like, and that's yeah. If you give them the other teams a head start, they'd still be in the title race with just what they've done lately. It's like you mentioned, just every week, no matter who plays, no matter who they play, where they play, what formation they play, how they play, they win. They find a way to win. And I think, again, what we continue to say, this is just the most complete version of Forge, because for all the good versions they've had, we've always seen them and they've had question marks. They've had teams like last year, who's going to score the goals? Who's their number 9? They've got a number 9 now. You've had times where, okay, the attacking depth. Right now, the attacking depth is about as deep as they've ever been. Their midfield, Bobby Smirnotis in the pregame called his midfield the best in the league. Hard to argue about it when you're rotating Kyle Becker, Alessandro Hojabupour, Noah Jensen out every week. Just what a luxury that is. And then the back line, it's incredible. They're so good defensively, where they shut up shop, and they're on pace for one of the best defensive seasons ever. And then for good measure, when all of that's breached, you got Yasim Kolelet, who's one of the best goalkeepers, and he doesn't even show it that much because he has this wall in front of him every week. Like, it legitimately is how deep they are and how complete they are. Like, there are no holes, no weaknesses, or at least not obvious holes and obvious weaknesses. And I think that's just so impressive, because every team like Ottawa might have the best attack in the league, but as we've seen lately, okay, maybe the defense is finally starting to show cracks. Maybe they're getting tired. Maybe they didn't rotate enough, and that's all kind of catching up to them. You look at other teams, there's little weaknesses that have been starting to expose. With Forge, we're waiting every week to happen, and I don't know, like, could their weakness be that they're too complete, right? Like, that maybe that's against them. But if that's what we're picking at, I think it kind of shows you why they are where they're at.
It's remarkable that they're maybe the most complete Forge team ever, when Bobby Smirniotis pretty openly at the end of last season was saying, like, that second era, he says they go in 3-year kind of eras at Forge, and they were starting a new one this year. He made so many changes in the squad and in the group he's got, and they look pretty unstoppable now. We say all this, maybe we'll look really stupid on Friday night when red hot Vancouver FC becomes the first one. They're maybe becoming giant slayers in the last couple of weeks, but at the moment, from our vantage point, it is really, really hard to see much standing in the way of Forge. Now, we will end the segment. We'll just touch on Atletico Ottawa here. Bobby Smirniotis also said that he thought they were tired at this point. They've not really made a lot of changes in their maybe 12, 13 players that they're usually going to start throughout the season. And possibly that is something to it. Alex, I don't think we're by any means ruling them out of this race right now. 4 points back, but they were disappointing in this game, right?
Absolutely. I think the flat first half, because that's something they'd kind of cleaned up, right, in recent, because they had that issue at the start of the year where they'd start games slow and then just absolutely turn the gears. You can't do that against Forge. You can't. Like, you got to come out swinging from minute one. But then again, even Ottawa in Langley in midweek, similar thing where they just kind of were a bit slow at the gates, even against Valor. Valor kind of, on that day deserved at least a point. It just feels like Ottawa. I think fatigue is the big one because ultimately, I think Ottawa are pretty close to as complete as Forge. At least they've played like it. But the one worry is, and I think where Forge has had the edge is, Forge changes their lineup every week. Every week. Like they rarely go back to back same lineups. Where Ottawa for months they wouldn't change the team. Like pretty much, it's
barring an injury, you can pick Atletico Ottawa's starting 11 for a month from now, right?
Literally, the only changes we've seen is Kozlowski going to start? Is Walker and Duhaney Walker going to start? Depending, so he's like to somehow do that, but otherwise, it's been Rodriguez, Tabla, Salter every week. You wonder if that plays a role when Tabla misses, a penalty, and he's been so good at those all year, right? That you kind of think a bit of mental fatigue maybe coming there. Every week it's Dos Santos and Antonora, and they're running every week. I mean, we don't necessarily have access to some of the running data, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 13, 14 kilometers every week. That quickly adds up to you. Got Aparicio and Castro. Lots of running again in that midfield with how this team plays. And then you got a young backline where a lot of them are, Kev Batney's pretty experienced, but, Kluche, Kozlowski, we haven't seen a whole lot of in pro environments. You do wonder if they're as well starting to deal with a bit of mental fatigue. And you can't help but think that when you see a Batney make a very rare mistake on Wednesday against Vancouver, you see Kozlowski, make a bit of a mistake as well. On that second Forge goal, I think they're tired, and it's going to be something interesting because often when you start to hit empty on the gas tank, it's not easy at this time of year to fill back up because you want to keep guys in rhythm. You want to keep playing. Granted, they do have pretty good depth, and I think they've continued to show that, but this definitely feels like a tough situation because with how good Forge has been, you don't want to start risking and rotating too much either. Yeah. So definitely a crucial stretch ahead for Ottawa because they need to find a right balance of get some of these guys some rest because September, there's some huge games. Just looking at the schedule, they, of course, schedule makers love this. They play Vancouver FC Leg 2, and they play Forge at home in back-to-back days. They need to find a way to be back at their best by then, hopefully still in the race for their sake, because if not, this weekend might have been the one where they kind of lost their way in the title race.
Yeah, at least for them, both those games will be in Ottawa, and Forge will be coming over from Vancouver. But, it's tough. And again, I'm not by any means saying that Sunday's game awarded the shield. But if fatigue is an issue with Atletico Ottawa, you do need to keep in mind that, if you're not going to be at your best every game for the rest of the regular season, you need to be at your best in the playoffs. And that might be, a thing to balance if you're Diego Mejia at the moment. Anyway, Atletico Ottawa host Cavalry next Saturday afternoon, or evening rather. Before that, Forge, though, in Vancouver to play Vancouver FC on Friday night.